At the dawn of the 13th century, the great civilizations of Eurasia believed they understood war. In northern China, the Jin dynasty commanded vast infantry armies protected by towering fortified cities. In Central Asia, the Khwarezmian Empire stretched confidently across Persia and beyond, enriched by trade and defended by heavy cavalry. In Europe, armored knights dominated the battlefield, charging with steel and tradition behind castle walls that symbolized permanence and power. Warfare was slow, predictable, and rooted in centuries of established doctrine. Armies marched with supply trains, sieges lasted months, and borders shifted gradually. Far to the east of these empires, beyond their maps and assumptions, lay the Mongolian steppe, a land of endless grasslands, brutal winters, and scattered nomadic tribes. Survival there demanded mobility, discipline, and mastery of the horse from early childhood. Life was harsh, alliances fragile, and strength measured not by walls but by speed and resilience. The settled empires saw the steppe as a distant frontier, a source of raids at worst. They did not yet realize that from this unforgiving landscape would emerge a leader, and an idea, that would challenge everything they believed about war. Around 1162, near the banks of the Onan River, a boy named Temujin was born into a world where survival depended on loyalty and strength. He was the son of Yasugei, a minor tribal chief of the Borjigin clan, and his early life seemed destined to follow the patterns of steppe tradition. But when Temujin was still a child, his father was poisoned by rival Tatars after a diplomatic visit. With Yasugei dead, the tribe abandoned Temujin's family, leaving his mother Holun and her children to fend for themselves on the harsh Mongolian plains. Hunger became a constant companion. They survived on roots, small animals, and whatever the land would give. Hardship quickly hardened the young boy. In a desperate struggle over food and authority, Temujin killed his half-brother Bektar, an act that revealed both the brutality of steppe life and his growing refusal to be dominated. Yet violence alone did not define him. As he grew older, he began to understand that tribal politics were built on fragile alliances and constant betrayal. He himself was captured by the Taikia tribe, former allies who now saw him as a threat. Enslaved and humiliated, Temujin managed a daring escape, an event that would cement his belief that resilience and cunning were more powerful than inherited status. Unlike many steppe leaders, Temujin did not rely solely on noble bloodlines. He began building alliances based on loyalty and merit rather than tribal aristocracy. Men from different clans were welcomed into his following if they proved capable and faithful. This approach quietly undermined centuries of tradition. Instead of reinforcing old divisions, he reshaped them. Loyalty would belong to the leader, not to the tribe. By his early adulthood, Temujin was no longer just a survivor, he was a unifier. Through a mixture of diplomacy, calculated generosity, and ruthless force against rivals such as Jamukha, he consolidated power across the Mongolian steppe. Each victory strengthened not only his army but his vision. The chaos that had defined his childhood became the blueprint for something entirely new, a society and military built not on heritage, but on discipline, merit, and absolute allegiance. From the ashes of abandonment and betrayal, Temujin was preparing to transform himself into something far greater than a tribal chief. In 1206, after years of relentless conflict and shifting alliances, the tribes of the Mongolian steppe gathered in a grand Kurultai, a council that would alter the course of history. There, Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, often rendered as Chinggis Khan, a title commonly understood to mean universal ruler. It was more than a ceremonial honor. It marked the birth of a new political and military order, forged from the chaos of the steppe. For generations, Mongol society had been divided by clan loyalties and noble bloodlines. Genghis Khan dismantled that structure with calculated precision. Rather than allow tribal identities to dictate power, he reorganized his people into a decimal military system that broke apart old allegiances. Units were structured into arbans of 10, jaguns of 100, minghans of 1,000, and tumans of 10,000. Crucially, these units were deliberately mixed, combining members of different tribes so that loyalty flowed upward to the Khan rather than sideways to family or clan. In doing so, Genghis transformed a loose confederation of tribes into a disciplined war machine. Promotion within this new system depended on merit and performance, not ancestry. Commoners could rise to command thousands if they demonstrated ability and unwavering loyalty. This was revolutionary in a world where noble birth usually determined rank. Discipline was equally uncompromising. Orders were to be obeyed instantly, desertion was punished harshly, and unity in battle was absolute. Though historians debate the precise nature of the yasa, the code traditionally attributed to Genghis Khan, its emphasis on order, obedience, and shared responsibility reinforced the cohesion of his forces. This reorganization did more than strengthen his authority, it created flexibility and coordination unmatched by neighboring states. Each unit functioned independently yet operated as part of a larger, synchronized whole. Commanders could maneuver thousands of warriors across vast distances without losing structure or control. What had once been scattered tribal fighters were now components of a single, integrated army. By 1206, Genghis Khan had not only unified the Mongols, he had engineered a system designed for expansion. The transformation was subtle but profound. He had replaced bloodline with loyalty, tradition with structure, and tribal rivalry with collective purpose. The steppe no longer housed competing clans. It now housed an empire in motion. What truly changed warfare was not simply the rise of a new leader, but the fusion of mobility, coordination, and psychological dominance into a single, devastating system. Genghis Khan understood that speed was more powerful than sheer numbers. Every Mongol warrior was a cavalryman, trained from childhood to ride with precision and endurance. Each carried multiple horses, allowing entire armies to travel extraordinary distances, sometimes up to 80 or even 100 kilometers in a single day. While traditional armies moved slowly with supply wagons and infantry columns, the Mongols moved like a living storm. Their primary weapon, the composite bow, was small enough to fire from horseback yet powerful enough to penetrate armor at impressive range. Mongol cavalry could strike from a distance, retreat before retaliation, and attack again from another direction. One of their most feared tactics was the feigned retreat. They would deliberately break formation and flee, luring enemy forces into pursuit. Once the opposing army lost cohesion, Mongol units would wheel around, encircle them, and unleash coordinated volleys of arrows. Discipline ensured that these maneuvers were not chaotic withdrawals, but carefully timed deceptions. Communication was another revolutionary element. Flags, drums, horns, and smoke signals allowed commanders to relay orders across vast battlefields. Units separated by miles could act in synchronization, creating the illusion of overwhelming numbers. Intelligence gathering further amplified their effectiveness. Before invasions, scouts and spies mapped terrain, studied political divisions, and identified weaknesses. No campaign began blindly. Perhaps most terrifying was their deliberate use of psychological warfare. Cities that resisted were often destroyed with calculated brutality, and survivors were sometimes spared specifically to spread stories of devastation. Fear traveled faster than armies, convincing many settlements to surrender without a fight. In this way, terror became a strategic tool, reducing resistance before a single arrow was fired. This combination, relentless mobility, tactical deception, disciplined coordination, and engineered fear, shattered the assumptions of medieval warfare. Castles, heavy cavalry, and numerical superiority no longer guaranteed safety. War was no longer a slow contest of endurance, it had become fluid, unpredictable, and merciless. And soon, the great empires of the East would experience this transformation firsthand. The first great testing ground of this new system came against the powerful states of northern China. In 1209, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the western Xia kingdom, a Tangut state that controlled vital trade routes along the Silk Road. Though smaller than the Jin dynasty to its east, western Xia possessed fortified cities and experienced armies. The Mongols adapted quickly. Rather than relying solely on open-field combat, they learned siegecraft, blockading cities, diverting rivers, and cutting supply lines. After sustained pressure, Western Xia submitted, agreeing to pay tribute and provide support. It was a warning of what was to come. In 1211, Genghis launched a far more ambitious campaign against the Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China from its capital at Zhongdu, near modern Beijing. The Jin commanded vast infantry forces and heavily armored cavalry, supported by strong defensive walls that had protected Chinese states for centuries. Yet the Mongols refused to fight on traditional terms. They bypassed fortified positions, devastated the countryside, and targeted supply networks. Multiple Mongol columns advanced simultaneously, sowing confusion across a wide front. Jin forces struggled to predict where the main blow would fall. When confrontation was unavoidable, Mongol cavalry used feigned retreats to stretch and isolate Jin troops. Their mobility allowed them to strike, disappear, and reappear elsewhere before defenders could regroup. Crucially, Genghis Khan integrated captured Chinese engineers into his army. These specialists constructed siege engines, catapults, and battering devices, enabling the Mongols to overcome even heavily fortified cities. Adaptability became a defining strength. Instead of resisting foreign technology, they absorbed and repurposed it. By 1215, Zhongdu itself fell after prolonged assault and internal instability weakened Jin resistance. The capture of the city marked a psychological turning point. A dynasty that had seemed unshakable was forced to retreat southward. The Mongols had demonstrated that even the most sophisticated defensive systems could be dismantled through speed, coordination, and relentless pressure. The campaigns in China proved that the Mongol way of war was not limited to steppe skirmishes. It could break empires rooted in centuries of military tradition. If fortified cities and massive armies could not stop them in the east, the implications for the rest of Eurasia were profound, and ominous. In 1218, a seemingly minor diplomatic incident ignited one of the most devastating campaigns in medieval history. A Mongol trade caravan arrived in the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast realm stretching across modern-day Iran, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Suspecting espionage, the governor of Otrar executed the merchants and confiscated their goods. When Genghis Khan sent envoys demanding justice, Shah Muhammad II responded by executing one ambassador and humiliating the others. In the world of steppe diplomacy, this was not merely an insult, it was a declaration of war. In 1219, Genghis Khan launched a full-scale invasion unlike anything the Islamic world had witnessed. Instead of advancing in a single massive column, Mongol forces split into multiple armies, striking across thousands of kilometers simultaneously. This multi-pronged approach shattered the Shah's ability to concentrate his defenses. Cities that expected to face one invading force suddenly found themselves surrounded from unexpected directions. Bokhara fell first. According to Persian chroniclers, Genghis Khan addressed the city's inhabitants after its capture, declaring himself the punishment for their sins. Whether embellished or not, the message was clear: resistance would bring annihilation. Samarkand followed soon after, despite its formidable fortifications and large garrison. Mongol forces used siege engineers, psychological intimidation, and coordinated assaults to overwhelm defenders. Many troops within the Shah's army, composed partly of conscripts and mercenaries, surrendered or defected under pressure. Meanwhile, separate Mongol detachments pursued Shah Muhammad across deserts and mountains, demonstrating extraordinary endurance and reconnaissance capabilities. The Shah died in exile on an island in the Caspian Sea in 1220, his empire collapsing behind him. Yet the devastation did not end there. Urgench, one of the wealthiest cities in Central Asia, faced prolonged resistance and suffered catastrophic destruction. The invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire showcased the full maturity of Mongol warfare: intelligence-driven strategy, synchronized long-distance operations, ruthless enforcement of terror, and adaptability in siege combat. Entire regions fell in rapid succession, not merely because of battlefield defeat, but because fear preceded the Mongol advance. By 1221, Central Asia lay in ruins, and the shockwaves of this campaign were already spreading westward toward lands that still believed distance would protect them. The first direct encounter between Mongol forces and European armies came in 1223 at the Battle of the Khalkha River. A Mongol detachment led by the brilliant general Subutai advanced deep into the lands of the Kievan Rus. When Rus princes and their Kuman allies mobilized to confront them, they believed they were chasing a retreating enemy. For days, the Mongols withdrew deliberately, drawing the coalition farther from its supply lines and stretching its formations. Then, at a moment of their choosing, they turned. Coordinated units encircled the fragmented Rus forces and unleashed relentless volleys of arrows. The coalition collapsed, its leaders captured and executed. The lesson was clear, yet it was not fully understood. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1241, Mongol armies returned under Bata Khan and Subutai, this time in far greater strength. Their strategy was precise and synchronized. One force moved into Poland, defeating European knights at the Battle of Legnica. Another advanced into Hungary, where King Bela IV assembled a large army near the Sejo River. At the Battle of Mohi, Mongol troops executed a complex plan. A frontal assault fixed Hungarian forces in place while a hidden detachment crossed the river at night and attacked from the rear. Once again, feigned retreats and rapid encirclement shattered heavily armored cavalry. European warfare depended on shock charges by knights and defensive strongholds. Against the Mongols' mobility and coordination, these methods faltered. Mongol scouts had mapped terrain, studied political divisions, and gathered intelligence months in advance. Communication across the battlefield allowed units to maneuver with precision, while European commanders struggled to adapt to an enemy that refused to fight by familiar rules. Panic spread across the continent. Rumors exaggerated Mongol numbers and described them as unstoppable. Yet at the height of their advance, news arrived of the death of Ogedai Khan, Genghis Khan's successor. According to Mongol tradition, leading princes were required to return east to participate in the election of a new great Khan. In 1242, the invasion abruptly halted. Europe had survived, but not through victory. The encounters had revealed a new reality: traditional medieval warfare was vulnerable. The storm had passed, but the transformation of war remained. When Genghis Khan died in 1227 during a campaign against Western Xia, he left behind more than conquered territory. He left a system. His successors expanded the empire further, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, creating the largest contiguous land empire in history. Under Mongol rule, vast stretches of the Silk Road were secured in what became known as the Pax Mongolica, enabling trade, communication, and the exchange of ideas across continents. Technologies such as gunpowder, printing techniques, and navigational knowledge moved more freely between East and West. Yet his greatest legacy was military. The principles he refined: speed, coordination, intelligence gathering, merit-based command, and psychological dominance, echoed through later empires. The Ottomans adopted mobility and gunpowder integration. Russian military organization was shaped in part by Mongol administration. Even modern maneuver warfare reflects the emphasis on rapid movement and synchronized operations. Genghis Khan did not merely conquer cities, he redefined how wars were fought. In replacing rigid tradition with fluid strategy, he shifted the balance of power from walls and armor to speed and organization. Long after the empire fractured, the idea endured that victory belongs not just to the strongest force, but to the one that moves fastest and thinks ahead.